Whatever happened to Hell? Again. And why do we see her literally everywhere at the moment? In order to answer this question, we'll go back in time a little bit to find out how Hell has performed throughout the different metas and seasons. I made a video on this last season. This one will have updates for the changes that happened after and how she changed once again, but we'll also quickly go over the original changes. In Season 2, Hell was generally considered weak for the majority of the time. In patch 2.13, Weakening Curse was nerfed. The pros eventually noticed this and Hell's popularity spiked. Around the same time, the Dirty Bubble meta was also present. For those of you who have not been around for that, this was a meta where many characters that were not technically designed to be built that way were built very tanky because tanks items were just too cheap and too efficient. So you would see characters being a lot more tanky than they would usually be. Think, for example, Thanatos or Aokwang with the defense items. And Hell kind of worked in that meta too, because obviously if you're more tanky, you benefit more from longer fights where you can get healed more. And no one is dealing as much damage as usual. Therefore, in December 2015, Hell saw a nerf to her Repulse and Inspire. The magical scaling of the heal was decreased from 50% to 30%, and the cooldown on Repulse was increased from 10 to 12 seconds. This nerf didn't initially make her complete trash, there were just other gods that were favored over her at this point. In 2016, with Season 3, this would change. Not only would gods have access to Weakening Curse at level 1 now, but also certain cooldown reduction items were nerfed, which generally is very beneficial to have for Hell, so if that's nerfed, she automatically gets weaker. Also, Odin mages returned into the meta, so there were a lot of things coming together that really pushed her out, and other healers like Guan Yu were just stronger. Therefore, Hell got buffed, not only once, but twice. The first buff was in patch 3.6 in April 2016, where the slow on her hinder was increased from 25% max to 30% max, so 5 more per rank starting from the first rank, which is very important because the slow then was more beneficial even unleveled because you have 10% instead of 5%. The cleanse was also kind of changed. Instead of going from 0.5 seconds to 1.3 seconds, it was 1.25 seconds at all level, so generally also a buff. This buff was nice, but it didn't do much for her. She was not picked up more than before, though these changes would remain. The second buff was in patch 3.12 in July 2016. Stance attunement got a buff, decreasing the time it takes to fully charge a stance from 5 to 3 seconds. This was her old passive that made her benefit in other ways from these stances than now. Hinder also was increased again. The slow was now increased from 10 to 30 to 20 to 40%. So remember, we originally started off with 5% here, now we start off with 20%, which was almost the max value of the old slow. Inspire got the scaling increased from 30 to 40% again. We had 50% at the start, and now we were back in the middle between that. And the movement speed buff of Inspire was increased from 15 to 25 to 25% at all ranks, so even one rank would be enough to be quite a lot faster in fights. But all of that didn't really help Hell that much. She was still a very unpopular pick for the most part, very niche if anything at all, and no one really picked her up, and people were mostly just asking for changes to the gods so she would get some more effectiveness again. At the same time, a lot of people were concerned about Hell buffs in general, simply due to the fact that any Hell buff meant that she could easily become the monster she once was, where she was just very unfun to play against. It was just mostly banned or was a free win basically. So, with Season 4, we saw a massive amount of changes to Hell. In patch 4.1, the first patch of Season 4, pretty much all her abilities received a minor or major overhaul. This overhaul is actually so major that I had to use another site that shows the full patch for her at once, because otherwise it would have been 2 bits. That's how big of a change they received at this point. Hyra's explanation was as follows. Hell has had quite a history in Smite. At times she was unbeatable, at other times she was hardly noticed. Balancing her has always been a challenge, mostly due to her massive AoE healing. The series of changes to her in 4.1 are aimed at a few things. Her AoE healing is being reduced, and more emphasis is being placed on her skill shots. Additionally, her base stats and clear abilities have been adjusted to make her a bit safer in the laning phase, giving her much needed consistency. A very important point of the changes for Hell was actually not mentioned in this description, but we'll get to that. First of all, her base health was increased from 345 to 380. Being very squishy early and basically the typical case of gank her early and you're fine, this buff gave her a little bit more survivability. Nothing crazy, but it definitely helped. Decay and Restoration probably received the biggest change. In Dark Sense, this ability now went through targets, allowing you to deal AoE damage at the end of the line, or if it was hitting a wall before that. In Light Stance, this ability was now able to hit friendly guards in order to heal them and heal yourself, or hit enemy guards in order to deal damage to them. The assigned heal values for the one were 180 plus 30 for both you and your allies. Hinder and Cleanse also received some changes. The CC immunity was increased from 1.25 seconds to 1.5 seconds in Light Stance. Remember, this was already buffed prior to that. It was originally starting at 0.5 seconds and going up to 1.3 seconds. And now even the highest value of that wouldn't beat the new value of 1.5, making it much easier to apply the cleanse. The cooldown was increased, however, from 14 to 10 seconds to 16 to 12 seconds, making up for that a little bit. The mana cost was decreased from 70 to 90 to 60 to 80, just 10 off per rank. When it comes to Inspire, only the Light Stance was changed. This ability would now heal in smaller amounts every 1 second for the 6 seconds duration. This meant that allies would heal for up to 30 per second plus 5% scaling for 6 seconds. Hell, however, would instantly receive the full amount of healing, being 180 plus 30% of your magical power. Again, going down in power scaling from the original 50%, then 30, then 40, now back to 30. And now we get to the unmentioned change that I feel like was very impactful. Switch stances would now apply MP5 in both stances, giving her much more freedom with her builds, but more importantly, Light Stance would now provide additional magical and physical protections of 5 to 25 each, meaning that she would provide her team with a lot of protections when there was no aura items around. At this point, Hell was being picked, but she was generally considered a very weak character. The only players that come to mind that frequently played her were Wolfie, who played her in mid, and MindyRocks420, if I recall the name correctly, who used to play with Weaken and I think actually played her in support, but I think also in mid, not entirely sure. But she was picked a little bit there, not much overall and not much by pros at all. But things happened, even though they didn't happen directly to Hell. Around the mid-season patch, multiple aura items got nerfed, making it a little less viable to go into aura items, especially straight away, and rather to rely on other items and maybe get the auras later. In return, Genji's guard got buffed. Remember one of the reasons why Hell fell out of meta in Season 3? Exactly. Cooldown reduction items not being as beneficial. Genji's guard would now be a very beneficial cooldown reduction item again. So there are a lot of tiny factors coming together here that gave Hell a push back into the meta. Obviously, most people didn't notice this initially, but the pros were kind of catching on. The first one to play in solo a little more was Rival's Deathwalker, who played her very frequently in ranked, but that was not where her big shining moment came. That happened when Aurora picked her at the Energy Invitational and performed very, very well, playing her in support. The build was focused around cooldown reduction mostly, with some typical support items like Emperor's Crown there, but obviously also the Genji's Guard. And overall, he not only showed off how much she can do with cooldown reduction, but also how much mobility she gets through all that, especially in combination with the high movement speed from her healing. Aurora actually found a way to successfully implement Chronos Pendant into the build, an item that I would otherwise generally not recommend at all, but in this context of just focusing purely on the CDR and some utility for your team, it actually made sense. And what you have to keep in mind is, because of the nerfed aura items, the support position was kinda okay for Hell, because she had her own protection aura built in, which is actually better than any other protection aura out there anyways. So what did Aurora do? He brought her into the spotlight. She has since been played a lot by other pros as well, for example Emilzy has frequently played her since, but it is worth pointing out that she did not have much popularity in the very recent relegations. While you will see Hell in your casuals and ranked games all the time at the moment, it's not unlikely that she will not find the same popularity in the pro scene. Hell is still a god that is relatively easy to shut down by a coordinated team. She has very strong counters, namely Sobek as seen in the video here, and she also takes quite some time to ramp up. Aurora himself said when asked about this that he wasn't sure how she would perform in the competitive scene yet, and that he saw the Invitational mostly as a mix between competitive and ranked due to the mixed teams. As such, we will see what the future holds for Hel, but for now she is definitely back in the meta and relatively high up, and especially in ranked she can be quite a nuisance to deal with. With that, thank you guys for watching. I hope this was interesting, I hope this was informative. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell, it really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. Do Sloth, out.